Earth's reclassification as a Class 14 Deathworld came on a Tuesday, a day already notorious for inducing existential crises. This particular Tuesday, however, surpassed all others. Dr. Quarax of the Interstellar Classification Bureau, 6 eyes blinking rapidly in a mix of disbelief and indigestion, stared at the report. His antennae quivered, a clear sign of his species' distress. "This must be an error," he declared, his voice echoing in the room filled with a diverse assembly of galactic scientists. No one dared challenge him, the data was undeniable. Earth, that seemingly innocuous blue-green planet, had exceeded every measure of planetary hostility. It was now in a class of its own, surpassing even Black Prime, the notorious molten rock riddled with acidic geysers and predatory flora. Professor Yil Hump, a gelatinous being whose entire body wobbled with his speech, requested a review of the metrics, convinced a system malfunction was to blame. Dr. Quarax complied, displaying the data, a damning indictment of Earth's perils, extreme weather, unpredictable geological activity, incredibly hostile wildlife, and, most baffling of all, a species called humans who not only persevered but flourished in such an environment. The data projected in the air painted a grim picture of Earth's perils: violent weather systems, unstable geological conditions, astonishingly aggressive fauna, and, most perplexing of all, a species called humans who not only endured these conditions but appeared to flourish within them. Why would any sentient being choose to live there? Faisal Gript, a lanky amphibian specializing in xenobiology, muttered, his voice filled with bewilderment. They must have been marooned. Dr. Quarax, who had been furiously rubbing his mandibles, abruptly retorted, they weren't marooned, Gript. They chose to live there. And what's more, they've invented bureaucracy. A collective shudder rippled through the assembled scientists. Bureaucracy was a well-known galactic hazard, responsible for the downfall of numerous civilizations. The idea that Earth had not only developed it but refined it to such a degree was alarming. Professor Yil Hump, his gelatinous body wobbling with the force of his pronouncement, declared, "We must investigate. This could be the most important discovery in galactic history, or the most disastrous." By the meeting's conclusion, a delegation was formed. The unfortunate volunteers included a loudly protesting Dr. Quarax, who was ultimately outvoted, Professor Yil Hump, who insisted he was far too gelatinous for such a mission, and Faisal Gript, who appeared too preoccupied with the question of whether humans consumed amphibians to offer much resistance. Their objective was straightforward: journey to Earth and determine the precise nature of its extreme dangerousness. As their ship, the Egregious Optimism sped towards Earth, the crew reviewed their mission briefing. Each page seemed to contain increasingly peculiar cautions: do not attempt to navigate a roundabout without assistance, refrain from discussing subjects termed politics, sports, or pineapple on pizza, and, most cryptically, never challenge the authority of the Department of Motor Vehicles. Dr. Quarax sighed. This is going to be worse than Blorhack Prime, isn't it? Considerably worse, Professor Yil Hump replied, his body slumping into a dejected puddle. At least on Blorhack, the acidic geysers are predictable. Finally, the crew approached Earth's orbit, greeted by a dazzling display of orbiting satellites and space debris. As they hailed the planet, a calm, almost bored voice crackled over the comms, "Welcome to Earth. Please state the purpose of your visit and be advised that all arrivals are subject to an entry fee of 75 credits per individual, or species equivalent." Dr. Quarax's mandibles clicked in frustration. "We're on an official mission from the Interstellar Classification Bureau." There was a pause, followed by the distinct sound of someone eating. "Yeah, that's great," the voice resumed between bites. "Still gonna need that fee. And, make sure you fill out form for 28B, otherwise you won't get past customs." "Customs?" Professor Yil Hump whispered, his voice laced with confusion. "What's that?" "No idea," Dr. Quarax replied, a sense of dread creeping into his tone, "but I have a bad feeling it's going to involve paperwork." After their less-than-stellar welcome, the delegation's first terrestrial experience was an unexpected trial: interstellar customs. Manning the booth was a man named Greg, whose rumpled uniform and weary demeanor spoke volumes about his enthusiasm for the job. He leaned against the counter, asking the purpose of their visit with a distinct lack of interest, as if he couldn't care less if they were tourists, dignitaries, or the vanguard of an alien invasion. Dr. Quarax cleared his throat and announced their arrival as the delegation from the Interstellar Classification Bureau, here to investigate Earth's new designation as a Class 14 Death World. Greg merely raised an eyebrow, muttering, "Death World, huh? Sounds about right." He then proceeded to inquire about Form for 28B, even after Quarax insisted it had been submitted electronically. A hard copy was required, naturally. Professor Yilhump, his gelatinous form quivering with bewilderment, questioned the redundancy of the request, only to be met with a nonchalant shrug and a curt explanation about policy. Resigned, the delegation rummaged through their belongings for the form, which Greg examined with the detached air of someone auditing tax returns. Eventually, he waved them through, but not before informing them of the next obstacle: immigration control. The delegation's navigation through Earth's bureaucratic maze quickly devolved into a series of mishaps. At immigration, they were required to have their photographs taken for visitor badges. However, the camera failed to register Professor Yilhump's translucent physique, leading to a string of perplexed officials asking if he could maybe smile or something. Faisal Gript was captured mid-blink, a look the humans cheerfully declared as classic DMV energy. Their next challenge was transportation. Instead of a diplomatic vehicle, they were directed to a rental agency where a relentlessly cheerful clerk named Linda presented them with a stack of forms thicker than Yilhump himself. Dr. Quarax, flipping through pages filled with jargon like liability waiver and additional driver insurance, inquired about the purpose of the documents. Linda chirped that it was standard procedure, then casually mentioned the necessity of a valid driver's license. Quarax, admitting he had no idea what a license was promptly informed he'd need to schedule a test at the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, a task Linda warned would likely take all day. The phrase "take all day" proved to be a gross understatement. The DMV was a sprawling edifice, filled with lines so long they seemed to stretch into infinity. Humans sat slumped in plastic chairs, clutching numbered tickets and wearing expressions of utter despair. A digital display announced "now serving for 32, while Faisal Gript's ticket read 922. He held it up in disbelief, questioning the seemingly impossible wait. Professor Yilhump, oozing into a nearby chair, suggested the wait might be an endurance test, part of the reason Earth was considered a death world. Hours crawled by as the delegation attempted to decipher the human system, their confusion growing with each passing minute. Why were some lines moving faster than others? What was the purpose of the perpetually closed appointment window? And why did every employee seem to possess an almost supernatural ability to avoid eye contact? By the time Gript's number was finally called, he wore the 1,000-yard stare of a seasoned war veteran. A disconcertingly cheerful examiner named Carol welcomed him into her booth and, after failing a vision test due to his unique amphibian eyesight, moved on to the written portion. The written test was a bewildering collection of questions about four-way stops and parallel parking, concepts that had no relevance to interstellar travel. By the end, Faisal Gript felt decades older. They emerged, clutching their newly acquired licenses and car keys, with Dr. Quarax muttering, "This planet is a nightmare." Yilhump, sagging into a dejected puddle, corrected him, "It's worse. It's organized." After their harrowing ordeal at the Department of Motor Vehicles, the alien delegation mistakenly believed the worst was over. They were quickly disabused of this notion when they attempted to arrange a meeting with Earth's leaders. It turned out Earth didn't have *** leader, but a bewildering array of governing bodies, each more convoluted than the last. "We need to speak with your planetary leader," Dr. Quarax explained to Dennis, the frazzled receptionist at the Galactic Liaison Office. Dennis, who looked as if he hadn't slept properly in decades, snorted. "Planetary leader? Which one? The UN Secretary General? The President of the United States? The CEO of Megabison?" Professor Yilhump wobbled in alarm. "Your leaders are corporate entities?" "Not officially," Dennis mumbled with a shrug, "but let's be realistic." Faced with the daunting prospect of choosing which leader to approach, the delegation decided to try the United Nations, assuming the word united implied a streamlined process. They were, of course, mistaken. Arriving at the UN headquarters, they were greeted by a receptionist whose smile was dazzling, but whose clipboard seemed to contain documents in every language known to the galaxy. "Do you have an appointment?" she chirped. "We're here on urgent galactic business," Dr. Quarak stated. "That's lovely," the receptionist replied without missing a beat, "but you'll still need an appointment. Current wait time for non-urgent requests is 3 weeks. This asterisk is asterisk urgent." Professor Yilhump interjected, his gelatinous body trembling with anxiety. "Oh, then it's only 2 weeks," she responded pleasantly. Desperate, the delegation resorted to pleading, bartering alien trinkets, and promising never to speak of this incident to anyone. Finally, after hours of negotiation, they secured a meeting with an undersecretary, a woman named Marjorie who looked perpetually exhausted and deeply unimpressed. "Let me get this straight," she began, peering over her glasses. "You want Earth to simplify its bureaucratic procedures because it's intimidating potential alien allies?" Dr. Quarak nodded emphatically. "Precisely. Your systems are not merely inefficient, they are a weapon. We spent 7 hours yesterday trying to open a bank account, only to be told we needed proof of residence, on a planet we're asterisk visiting star." Marjorie raised an eyebrow. "And you thought the UN could do something about that?" "Honey, I can't even get the vending machine fixed in this building." The delegation left the UN defeated, burdened with yet another stack of paperwork and a growing sense of existential dread. Their next stop was the Office of Interplanetary Commerce, where they hoped to establish a trade agreement. This proved to be another fiasco. The office was housed in a dilapidated building with flickering lights and the faint aroma of despair. A disconcertingly cheerful clerk presented them with a booklet entitled Guide to Earth Trade Protocols, a volume so massive it required a handcart. "Do we need to read all of this?" Faisal Gript asked, his amphibian eyes wide with horror. The clerk chuckled. "Of course not. Just the first 4,872 pages. The rest is supplemental." The delegation began the arduous task of deciphering the tome, which included chapters on everything from tariff regulations to the culturally appropriate dimensions for diplomatic gift baskets. By the time they reached the section on cultural sensitivities regarding cheese, Professor Yilhump declared, "This planet isn't a death world, it's an insanity world." Just as they were preparing to submit the required forms, another obstacle arose. The office's ancient printer emitted a series of agonizing wheezes before jamming catastrophically. A technician was summoned, but his attempts to fix the machine quickly devolved into a shouting match with a coworker about toner accountability. "Is this normal?" Dr. Quarak asked a nearby human. The human sighed. "It's Wednesday. What do you expect?" Following their less-than-stellar reception, the delegation's initial terrestrial encounter proved to be an unforeseen trial, interstellar customs. A man named Greg, sporting a creased uniform and an aura of utter weariness, manned the booth. He leaned against the counter, inquiring about the purpose of their visit with a noticeable lack of enthusiasm, as if the nature of their arrival, be it tourist, diplomat, or extraterrestrial invader, was of little consequence to him. Dr. Quarak formally announced their presence as the delegation from the Interstellar Classification Bureau, dispatched to investigate Earth's recent designation as a Class 14 Death World. Greg simply arched an eyebrow, murmuring, "Death World, huh? Figures." He then proceeded to inquire about Form for 28B, despite Quarak's insistence that it had been transmitted electronically. A physical copy, it seemed, was non-negotiable. Professor Yilhump, his gelatinous form trembling with bewilderment, questioned the necessity of the duplicate request, only to be met with a nonchalant shrug and a terse explanation regarding our protocol. Accepting their fate, the delegation rummaged through their belongings to locate the form, which Greg scrutinized with the detached air of someone reviewing tedious financial records. He eventually granted them passage, but not before apprising them of the subsequent obstacle, immigration control. The delegation's passage through Earth's bureaucratic labyrinth promptly descended into a series of unfortunate events. At immigration, visitor badges, requiring photographs, were issued. However, the camera proved incapable of capturing Professor Yilhump's translucent physique, prompting a series of puzzled officials to inquire whether he could perhaps offer a smile. Faisal gripped was immortalized mid-blink, a facial expression the humans cheerfully deemed quintessential DMV vibes. Their next hurdle involved transportation. Anticipating a diplomatic vehicle, they were instead directed to a car rental agency. There, an excessively cheerful clerk named Linda presented them with a stack of forms that dwarfed even Yilhump in thickness. As Dr. Quarax leafed through pages dense with jargon like liability waiver and supplementary driver coverage, he inquired as to the document's purpose. Linda chirpily explained it was standard operating procedure, before casually mentioning the requirement of a valid driver's license. Upon Quarax's admission of his unfamiliarity with such a document, he was promptly informed of the necessity to arrange an examination at the Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, a task Linda cautioned would likely consume the entire day. The alien delegation regrouped in their cramped hotel room, a space overwhelmed by floral patterns and an air of subtle despair. Quarax paced restlessly by the window, muttering to himself in a low, agitated tone. Gript sat perched on the edge of the bed, idly nibbling on a decorative pillow, while Yilhump stared blankly at the room service menu as if it held the answers to the universe's mysteries. "Let's review," Quarax began, his antennae twitching with frustration. "We've been on this planet for 5 days. What have we accomplished?" "I got a driver's license," Gript offered, his voice muffled by the pillow stuffing. Quarax glared at him. "And?" "Severe emotional trauma," Yilhump added helpfully, his gelatinous form slumping further against the table. Quarax stopped pacing and slammed a stack of papers down on the desk. "This is what we have. Thousands of forms, contradictory instructions, and absolutely no closer to understanding why Earth was reclassified as a Class 14 death world. Maybe the answer is in the forms themselves?" Yilhump suggested, prodding the papers with a tentacle. Quarax's mandibles clicked in exasperation. "The only thing these forms reveal is that humans have a bizarre fixation on signatures, stamps, and acronyms. How many times do we have to prove we exist?" A knock at the door interrupted their collective misery. It was Dr. Gwyneth Thornbury, the human scientist assigned as their liaison, who had been conspicuously absent until now. She stepped inside, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression that mirrored their own exhaustion. "Apologies for the delay," Gwyneth said, setting down her briefcase. "I was swamped with paperwork." Quarax let out a humorless laugh. "Swamped with paperwork? You live here. How is that even possible?" Gwyneth sighed and opened her briefcase, revealing an intimidatingly thick stack of documents. "Welcome to Earth," she said dryly. "The planet where red tape multiplies faster than rabbits. But I think I can help you understand why you're really here." The delegation leaned in, their frustration momentarily overshadowed by a flicker of hope. "It's not the storms, or the wildlife, though both are certainly spirited," Gwyneth began. "It's not even the humans themselves, though we can be a rather unpredictable bunch. The reason Earth is a Class 14 death world is this." She gestured to the mountain of papers. "Bureaucracy," Yilhump whispered, as though the word itself might conjure more forms. "Precisely," Gwyneth confirmed. "We didn't intend for it to become this bad. It started as a way to organize, to maintain some semblance of fairness. But over centuries, it evolved. Now, even the people who created the systems don't fully comprehend them." "But why?" Gript asked, bewildered. "What compels a species to construct such a monstrosity?" Gwyneth paused. "Survival. Earth is a volatile place. We're constantly battling disease, natural disasters, each other. Bureaucracy was our attempt to impose order on the chaos. But somewhere along the way, it became the chaos." The delegation returned to their hotel, a space that felt increasingly claustrophobic with each passing day. Dr. Quarax, his 6 eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief, paced restlessly. Faisal Gript gnawed on a complimentary mint, the sugary sweetness doing little to soothe his frayed nerves. Professor Yilhump, meanwhile, had assumed the form of a despondent puddle on the floor, occasionally murmuring about the futility of existence. "So," Quarax began, his voice tinged with resignation, "we've encountered Earth's customs, immigration, transportation system, and governing bodies. What's next on the agenda for this Deathworld experience? Gript swallowed the mint with a sigh. Apparently, we need to navigate the intricacies of interplanetary commerce. We have a meeting scheduled with the Trade Commission tomorrow. Yilhump gurgled from the floor. A meeting? More like an endurance trial. I predict endless discussions, incomprehensible jargon, and a distinct lack of actual progress. Quarax rubbed his mandibles wearily. I'm starting to suspect that the real danger on this planet isn't the wildlife or the weather, but the paperwork. We're drowning in forms, Gript. Forms for everything. Forms to breathe, forms to think, forms to fill out other forms. A knock at the door interrupted his rant. It was Gwyneth Thornbury, their human liaison, carrying a briefcase that seemed to groan under its own weight. Good news, she announced, a forced cheerfulness in her voice. I've secured a meeting with the Joint Interplanetary Trade Commission. Just need you to sign these preliminary documents, initial these addendums, and complete this pre-meeting evaluation form. Grip choked on a fresh mint. Pre-meeting evaluation? What are they evaluating? Our sanity? Gwyneth shrugged. Probably. Also, there's a snack request form. Fill that out too. The catering staff are particular. Quarax stared at the mountain of papers, a sense of impending doom settling over him. This planet is going to be the death of me, he muttered, grabbing a pen with a trembling hand. Hours later, the delegation found themselves in the imposing Trade Commission building, a monolithic structure surrounded by a throng of protesting humans. Their signs displayed slogans like "Abolish the stapler tax" and "Down with bureaucracy," a sight that filled the aliens with a strange sense of camaraderie. Inside, the meeting hall was cavernous, the tables stretching into the distance like an endless bureaucratic highway. Each place setting boasted a microphone, a water pitcher, and a thick instruction manual on proper meeting etiquette. The head of the commission, Randolph K. Straddleworth III, entered the room with an air of self-importance, his presence radiating an aura of someone who had spent far too long debating the Oxford comma. Welcome, he boomed, his voice echoing through the hall. Let us begin by reviewing the agenda. Dr. Quarax leaned forward eagerly. Excellent. We propose a straightforward trade agreement. Straddleworth held up a hand, interrupting him mid-sentence. Before we discuss trade, he declared, his voice dripping with authority, we must review the pre-agreement framework. It's a 47-point plan designed to ensure equitable terms for all parties. 47 points. Professor Yilhump exclaimed, his gelatinous form wobbling in indignation. Why not simply draft a single, concise agreement? Straddleworth sniffed disdainfully. That would be reckless. Now, point 1, defining the term trade. 3 agonizing hours later, the delegation had made absolutely no progress. Every attempt at negotiation was met with a new obstacle, a new layer of bureaucratic red tape. The humans debated the merits of exporting interstellar cheese, the culturally appropriate size of diplomatic gift baskets, and the precise shade of blue required for official seals. Finally, Faisal Gript snapped. Enough, he shouted, slamming his webbed hand on the table. We came here to assist you, but all you've done is bury us under a mountain of meaningless procedures. I demand answers. The room fell silent. Straddleworth adjusted his glasses, a flicker of something that might have been honesty crossing his face. The truth is, he admitted, his voice low, we don't actually want intergalactic trade. We barely comprehend our own tax codes. Adding alien economies into the mix would be chaotic. Dr. Quarax blinked in astonishment. Then why subject us to this charade? Straddleworth sighed. Because, he explained, Earth's greatest strength is its ability to pretend we know what we're doing. If we make the process sufficiently complicated, most species simply give up. Then we never have to admit we're completely out of our depth. The delegation exchanged horrified glances. Gwyneth, who had been silently observing the proceedings, offered a weak shrug. He's not wrong, she muttered. As they left the Trade Commission, defeated and demoralized, Dr. Quarax turned to Gwyneth. Is this a normal, he asked, gesturing vaguely at the bureaucratic nightmare they had just endured. Is this how your species functions? Bluffing your way through existence until everyone else gives up? Gwyneth sighed. Pretty much, she admitted. It's how we won the Cold War. Faisal gripped groaned. So, what now? We report back to the Galactic Union that Earth is too much trouble. Professor Yilhump, his voice tinged with a newfound madness, offered a different suggestion. Or, we simply never return. Dr. Quarax nodded solemnly. Agreed. The delegation boarded their ship, the *egregious optimism*, leaving the bureaucratic labyrinth of Earth behind. As they entered hyperspace, Quarax muttered to himself, let the humans keep their death world. We'll warn the rest of the galaxy to stay far, far away. In the quiet of the ship's cabin, Gwyneth's words echoed in their minds, Earth survives because it confuses everyone else into leaving it alone. Perhaps, they realized, that was the most dangerous aspect of Earth after all. Its sheer, unadulterated, mind-boggling complexity was a defense mechanism unlike any they had ever encountered. It wasn't the predators, the natural disasters, or even the humans themselves that made Earth a Class 14 death world. It was the paperwork,